Welcome to the American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division 2016 webinar series. By listening to our webinar series, you will get the best of the best in lean industry. Stay tuned to the end of this recording for more details. This month, our speaker is Dave Hagan, the Director of Process Development for the Boldt Company. Lean can be applied to areas other than manufacturing, medical, and government. Join Dave of the Boldt Company as he introduces us to lean construction and design methodologies and the integrated lean project delivery contracting method. The Boldt Company is one of the largest construction companies in the United States and has realized significant impact from applying the concepts of lean. Let's join Dave as he gives us an introduction to lean design and construction.
So hi everybody, glad you could make it to the webinar here. I'm going to talk a little bit about lean design and construction. The company I work for, Boldt, is about $1 billion a year in sales, and we do all sorts of construction. We do industrial, wind farms, power plants, paper mills, a lot of healthcare, and we have found that taking a lean design approach and a lean construction approach has really helped our clients and benefited our company. So I'm going to start out a little bit talking about how we as a company got into this lean thing. Trust me, it's not a sales pitch for Boldt. It's just some facts about how we got to where we are today. I'm going to spend very little bit of time talking about the history of lean, and then I'm going to talk about practical application and some of the tools that we use daily in our processes. So let's get started. So like I said, Boldt now is about $1 billion a year company. We have offices all over the country. We do some international work, but very little. I was involved in a project in Canada that we did here just recently. But mostly we're concentrated in the Midwest with a fair amount of work here on the West Coast where I am. I'm currently in Sacramento. So I wanted to give you a timeline for what exactly how exactly Boldt got into this whole lean idea. So started in 1998. We had a productivity challenge, and to be more specific about that, we had a paper mill near our home office in Appleton, Wisconsin that was doing a large changeover for a paper press, or a paper manufacturing piece, I should say. When we realized that it was going to be nearly impossible to get this thing installed in the time that was allotted, we figured out we had to find a better way. And one of our people, his name is Paul Reiser, decided to dive into this whole idea about lean. And when he discovered some of those steps in that process, he thought, well, wow, that's really great stuff. Maybe we could use this in other ways and other projects. So by 2001, we had 40 projects that were done through this method, and then in 2006, we continued to expand into cost modeling and value-based contracting. We did study action teams, which are basically kind of book clubs with employees around different lean books, and that was really helpful as we broadened our knowledge, as a tribal knowledge, I guess you'd say. We did some prototyping for hospital work, and that worked really well. And then we really started applying a lot of that in earnest on a very large project that I'm currently involved in here in San Francisco. And that project is total value. There's 2 different campuses, but the one project itself is over 1 million square feet and has about a construction value of somewhere around $1.3 billion. So when we got onto a project that big, we could see, again, that these lean processes really could benefit us in great ways. So currently we're doing probably over $4 or $5 billion worth of integrated project delivery work right now. And our goal here in 2016 and 2017 is to continue to drive lean processes throughout the company. So that's kind of where we are. So let's take a poll here real quick to kind of get a gauge for where people are in their lean journey. So tell me a little bit about what you think, what phrase best describes your knowledge of lean in this context that we're talking about in design and construction. Does it refer to the fat content on the meat of your sandwich? Do you know a little about it but would like to know more? Or maybe your company currently uses some lean processes and be interested to know that. And finally, you guys are so good at it that Toyota could learn from you. So
we'll take,
you guys would...
I'm sorry, Dave, we'll take about another 10-15 seconds and we should have good results.
All right, terrific. So I'll explain a little bit about this. When I first started doing these kinds of presentations, I found that people had no concept really about lean. And I think over the past 5 or 6 years, maybe even decade, last decade, people have become more and more knowledgeable about lean. It's something that we hear about a lot more than we used to. And so that's why I asked the question. I really like to gauge the audience's knowledge of where they are in their lean journey. So
it looks like 2% think it's meat content, 33% I know something about it, 59% my company currently uses some lean, and 6% could teach Toyota.
Wow, I want to beat that 6%. Well, that's really great. And I think, and just so you guys know, when I first started doing this, like Paul said, I've been doing this for about 15 years. And obviously number one is a joke answer, but there were very few people who answered even number 3 who said that their company currently uses some lean processes. So that's fascinating to me. Whoa, I don't know what the heck happened there. My mouse is a little jumpy. Let me back up a little bit. So let's jump forward now and talk about lean and what lean means to us. In organizational theory, lean is considered a socio-technical system. In other words, a system that combines people and processes and machinery. It really came out of a lot of work here in the United States, although Toyota took it and adopted it and really made it famous, I guess you'd say. But it was born of the work of Isaac Whitney, the gentleman who invented the original cotton mill. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Frederick Taylor, some of you guys may have heard about him, who did a lot of time motion studies way back when. Of course, Henry Ford, and then Deming, who was a really interesting character who came here from the United States and ended up in Japan, and actually was the guy who brought the whole idea about this type of production system to Japan. And then, of course, Teiichi Ohno, who was the grand master, I guess, of this type of system for Toyota. But generally, when we talk about lean, it's considered an adaptation of the Toyota production system. And that's really where this all came from. That's really where it got some momentum. So, like I said, Toyota was really adopted this, and after World War II, they were devastated. Obviously, the nation of Japan was ruined. Toyota decided to be a car company, and I have people ask me all the time, well, you know, why do we talk about Toyota? Because, you know, Toyota now is probably best known for recalls. I shouldn't say best known, but you know, that's been in the news a lot lately, that some of their cars have not met the quality standards that people would have expected, or safety standards for that matter, and that's been a problem. So the way I would answer the question about why we talk about Toyota is because it is, wrong or right, it is where it started. And even though they've stumbled over the last couple of years, I think now they're making a comeback. Even though they stumbled, I think they would tell you, in fact, I've heard Toyota people say this, that it wasn't a problem with lean, it was that they got away from lean. And their focus became more about being the #1 car company in the world as opposed to building high-value quality cars. So that's why we talk about Toyota. So I did mention Eli Whitney, who the father of the cotton gin, and you guys probably remember from your history books in high school or maybe even college that he was really the first person to really generate a machine that had mass appeal. And probably what most people don't know is that one of the interesting traits about that cotton gin was that it had interchangeable parts. So you could take a piece off of one cotton gin, a Whitney cotton gin, and you could put it on another and it would fit and work perfectly. And that was more of a sign of the industrial age as much as anything, because manufacturing tolerances didn't exist before then that really would allow interchangeable parts. So after a long time after Eli Whitney did his thing with the cotton gin, came a guy named Frederick Taylor, and he's an interesting character as well. But let's just say this. I think a lot of people think about time and motion studies and they think of maybe an oppressed workforce as somebody standing over their shoulder taking time and motion studies. Well, these women are putting together bits and pieces for some kind of part. I don't know exactly what they're building, but generally speaking, Frederick Taylor came up with this idea of really studying time and motion to really get an idea about where we could improve productivity. So later on comes Henry Ford, and Henry, of course, everybody knows this now, is the father of the mass production line. He really paid his people really well, but they were working under some pretty difficult conditions. The environment of the plants was decent, I guess, but from what I've read, you might be the left front tire guy 12 hours a day for on and on and on. So there wasn't a lot of interchangeability. So while they were paid really well, there were some, it was a difficult place to work. Let me just put it that way. So as I said, after World War II, Japan was pretty devastated after the effects of the war, and a group of people got William Deming to come to Japan to talk about productivity. And Deming knew a lot about productivity and studied it, and strangely, in the United States, a lot of his study didn't take hold, but the Japanese got a hold of it, and a group called the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers invited Deming over to talk to them and help them rebuild their country, basically. One of his students was a gentleman by the name of Taiichi Ohno, who was working for Toyota. And Taiichi took these ideas that Deming had, and with Deming's help, really incorporated them into what's called the Toyota production system. And so this house that has appeared on your screen to the left is called the Toyota Production System House. And I'm not going to go all the way through it, but just that top beam across the very top there is their goal was highest quality, lowest cost, and shortest lead time. And again, when you talk to people at Toyota about where they stumbled, they would say that they got away from highest quality and really didn't practice what they preach, I guess you'd say. So, and then on the bottom bar where it says stability, so if work is predictable, it's a lot easier to plan, and it's a lot easier to perform. So that stability is just very, very important. So anyway, that's some of the characters that came up with this. And one of the principles of lean is what's called the 7 wastes, which, by the way, now I've heard described as the 8 wastes and even the 9 wastes. I'll explain it to you here in just a second. But we use the acronym of TIMWOOD: transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overprocessing, overproduction, and defects, as really the 7 wastes as described by Ohno and Deming. So we focus on all of those 7. Now, the 8th waste that is often talked about today is the waste of people, or the waste of people who have skills that we aren't capitalizing on. And the 9th waste I've heard described recently by a gentleman, a friend of mine by the name of Norman Bodek, who wrote a lot of lean books, is that the 9th waste is leadership. In other words, leadership that won't get out of the way. So that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about the 8th and 7th, 8th, and 9th wastes. So why lean? Why did we take this, which is basically an auto manufacturing process, and why have we taken this and embraced it in construction and design? Well, this is typically how construction and design goes. I like to say that the architects are bailing while the contractors are sitting up front and saying, we're glad the hole isn't at our end. And that is to say that we just, as an industry, we have not worked together very well. It's a very adversarial relationship quite often between design, construction, and even on a construction site, there's a lot of friction between different trade partners or subcontractors, if you will, and the general contractors. So I was explaining to Paul before we started the seminar here, the webinar, that I really found out about lean when a local construction company here in California said, we have a large program and we've got to deliver it for less, or we can't get it built. And of course these hospitals provide a very significant value to the citizens of the area. And if you looked at, now this is actually almost 13 years old now, but this, I'm afraid to tell you that the latest graphs aren't any better, but that blue line is productivity, non-farm productivity, since 1964 to 2003. So you can see that productivity more than doubled in that time span in non-farm productivity, right? The red line is construction productivity. And the first time I saw this graph, I was absolutely appalled. In fact, I was sure that the data was incorrect, but I've looked at a lot of studies since then and realized that it's accurate. In fact, it may be optimistic. Our productivity in construction has actually declined despite the increase in technology, despite all of the things we've learned in the past 50-some years. Our productivity has declined. So here's another way to look at that. Manufacturing productive time is well, there's only 12% waste, right? So 88% is productive in manufacturing. That's pretty cool. But in construction, we have a waste that runs about 57% our wasted time. A lot of that is in rework. You're doing work that's already been installed once. So our production time is about 43%. We also see that in the measurement of commitments that people make. There was a study done by Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell a while ago that measured the percentage of commitments that were kept on a construction project. And believe it or not, 57% of the commitments on a construction project were not met. So pretty horrible, pretty horrible. And as I said, I have this client here in California who is looking at these cost indexes. This is from early 2000, and here they are with an $8 billion construction program, healthcare. And healthcare costs were increasing. They were just out of control. And so they looked at it and said, how are we going to get a hold of this? How can we go to our board and say we're going to build these hospitals when we can't control cost? That was a huge problem, especially on a program that large. The other thing is that our typical construction process doesn't work very well in terms of quality. My friend and mentor, Will Lichtig, has said that buildings leak at the intersection of contracts. And that's, you think about it, that's really true. Windows leak where they meet somebody else's work, even though the window manufacturer or the window installer didn't do that work, they still leak. So there is a lack of collaboration and a lack of overlap and joining of the hands, so to speak, in the process of actually getting these buildings built. And probably even more concerning is that construction is inherently unsafe, and we hurt a lot of people in construction every year. In fact, this is a good time for our second poll. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, how many people would you think are injured every day in the United States? And just select one of the following, right? So 89 people a day, 225, 625, or 1,245. Our goal here at Boldt is to make sure that our workers go home to their families every day in better shape than when they left, which is kind of a tall order. But as a result, we really build planning for safety into our planning process, and I think that has really helped us control injuries on our projects. Where, like we like to say, we're not trying to avoid injuries, we're trying to avoid incidents or even near misses. We're really working at that level. So part of the planning process really includes safety.
Dave, I do have a question. I've seen and been part of manufacturing value stream mapping exercises and different things that show more like a 95% waste in the manufacturing or the things that I've seen. That's a lot different than what you indicated. Are you looking at it in a different way, or?
No, those are just some statistics that we pulled out, and I'm sure that it varies depending upon what you're manufacturing and what kind of environment and those kinds of things. That was just some averages that we found. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and like I said, people here in the construction and design industries are really shocked when I tell them how inefficient we are. But You know, there was a time, certainly, when the auto manufacturing business in the United States was really ineffective and inefficient, I should say. That certainly has gotten better. So.
Results of the poll, 89, or I should say 9%, 89, 14%, 225, 43%, 625, 34%, 1,245.
Yeah, so that's typical, I think, of the responses I usually see when I ask this question. So the number is actually 625, and that's way too many. You'll also see statistics. By the way, I want to make sure that you guys understand this. You'll also see statistics that say that it's closer to 450, but it kind of depends on what the survey is actually including. So we think the number is somewhere around 625 a year, but the sad thing is the fatality rate is very high. In fact, I'm going to back up a slide here. We see that on average, about 720 people are killed every year in construction. 721 people, I think, is the number that we have, and that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's like 18% of all the fatalities that occur in private industry in the United States. 18% of those fatalities actually come from construction accidents. So it's pretty horrible. Certainly something that we needed to address. And again, I think this is one of the reasons we tried to adopt Lean, is because when we have more of a collaborative approach to how we're getting the work done, we can foresee safety issues sooner. The other thing is that traditional construction and design delivery is siloed. There's somebody who asks the question, why are we going to build something? And then somebody else decides what we're going to build, and then somebody else decides how we're going to build it. And it's not a very efficient system. The projects that I'm currently working on here in San Francisco that are quite large, we've combined that why, what, and how, and we've gotten that all together. So I think this demonstrates that same thing, in that if you look at pre-construction services, our goal is to know a lot about the project late in the project, right? So and the problem is that we figure out that we need that information way too late. So we want to try and drive that whole knowledge concept to the left so that we know more about construction and what we're going to, when we're going to run into problems sooner, so we can better anticipate issues, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So again, another look at these silos that I talked about. We have these silos between the designer and the owner who really is looking for value, and there's these walls between them, and if we can't get rid of those walls, we have a big problem. So our goal is, and this was part of the Sutter program as well, is to really exercise around the 5 big ideas. And the ideas are that the design and construction teams and the owner will collaborate, really collaborate, and that we know from experience that projects are networks of commitments. And I would go so far as to say that successful projects are networks of kept commitments. So we really focus on keeping our commitments. We also tightly couple learning with action. It's part of that plan, do, check, act cycle that we talk about. If we make a mistake, we try and learn from it. We try and plan so that there aren't mistakes, but when they do happen, we try and learn from them and then roll them into the process. The other thing is we really try and optimize the whole. So in traditional contracting for a project, people are very focused on their scope of work and optimizing the efficiency of just their scope of work, when really we want to be looking at the project overall and say, this is exactly how we're going to work together as a team to optimize the whole. And we can do that when we start doing things like profit sharing or risk pools, where companies will put in some of their profit at risk, and then when they realize that the success of the project really is the hinge on which their profit swings, they tend to approach the project differently. And lastly, increase relatedness. We really want to increase the relatedness between the team members so that they know each other as people and not just providers of a certain service or task. So I'm going to demonstrate this a little bit And I've been in the construction and design industry now for many, many years, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how traditional delivery works, right? So traditional delivery is usually a three-legged stool. It's the owner, the architect, and the general contractor. And what happens is, because we're all trying to reduce our own risk, we act against each other's best interests. And the line between the architect or design group and the general contracting group has become more and more ambiguous as general contractors and subcontractors and trade partners actually provide more and more design. So that's gotten a little bit crazy, right? So in an integrated lean project delivery process, we want to make it look a little bit more like this, because here's what happens. We have these up here in the upper right, you'll see these small yellow dots that represent different people on the owner's team. And on the lower right, you'll see the general contractor with maybe an electrical subcontractor or a mechanical contractor. And then on the lower left, you'll see the architect, which is the big A, and they may have a mechanical engineer and a structural engineer and an electrical engineer working with them, right? So what happens, and this is exactly what happened for us, is that we have a surgeon who's up there in that upper right group, a surgeon who says, you know, I want to try this new technology in my operating room, but to do so I need a certain temperature. I mean, a certain humidity level, something like that. Well, what happens is all of that information must be met by the guy who's actually going to design the controls. In this case, in the lower right, the controls contractor has to provide the proper controls to meet that surgeon's need. So the surgeon goes to the owner's representative, it goes to the architect, it goes to the mechanical contractor, it goes back to the general contractor, it goes to the mechanical provider, it goes to the contractor who actually meets the need. Not very efficient, right? And what if the guy down there in the lower right says, you know what, I now understand what he needs, but what if I can't meet it? Then it all goes back the other way. So that cycle is really not productive. So what we try and do is bring everybody in an integrated project delivery fashion. We try to bring everybody to the table at the same time. I've actually sat at design meetings with doctors while the guy who's actually going to build the wall is sitting right there at the same time, and we can have fast discussions and decisions around the best way to meet a need. So again, remember I was talking about we have that late learning curve. We really want to drive that forward so that we hire the architect early, we hire the CM, GC early, we hire the engineers early. We even hire the major trades early, because that way we can better design a building that meets the client's needs, and we actually design something that can be built. So we're just trying to get rid of those silos, right? And that's the big deal. We just kind of mismatch all of these together so that they really, really work well. So here's another thing that we do in lean construction and design. It's called target value design. It's really something that we've started to do a lot of in our company, and that is that we get a team together and we talk about what the costs versus the value is, and we try and hit that sweet spot. And the way we do that is by building integrated teams, and we call them cluster groups, or they can be called system teams or whatever. But the idea is that, let's say, for example, I have a MEP cluster group and the mechanical, electrical, plumbing group, and that group would include somebody who is designing or building structure, somebody who might even be doing material handling, vertical transportation, and a representative from that owner. And so those groups get together, all those various disciplines get together and talk about mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design. Now you think, in the case certainly of landscape, that's probably a reach, but mechanical, electrical, plumbing building design is often dependent upon structure, and the structure design is often dependent upon mechanical, electrical, plumbing equipment because it weighs a lot and takes up a lot of space. So getting those people all around the table during the design phase is really important. So here's a team that I worked with in Canada. The gentleman on the right is my friend Eric, who's a very talented architect. The gentleman on my left is, on your left I should say, with the glasses on, is Cromwell. Cromwell's an estimator. To his left is Tom, and Tom's a mechanical engineer. Art there with the glasses down over his nose is a builder, and the woman on the right is also a designer. So this very diverse team is working on solving some very specific problems on the project. So let's jump now to our last poll. And actually, this is more of a test to see if you were really paying attention. But what percentage of commitments made on a construction site are actually met? Is it number 1, 84%, number 2, 75%, number 3, 63%, or number 4, 46%? So if you were listening earlier, I gave the answer to that. But like I said, this would be a good test to see if you're paying attention. If I put anybody to sleep, we'll know, right? So, well, I'll just mention while we're waiting for the results of that poll that we actually do a lot of work to measure commitments on our project. We actually have what's called a planned percent complete, or PPC we call it, percent planned complete, and we measure every week the commitments made on our project and whether or not we've met them or not. And currently on some of our projects, we meet about 85% of our commitments. Our goal is 90 or above. Some projects we don't do that well, and it depends upon the mix of the team and the complexity of the design. But we put enough emphasis on that we actually measure that metric. Do we have results back from the poll, Paul?
I do, and before I do that, I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, put those questions in the question box, and we'll answer all of them at the end. And I do have, sorry here. I was supposed to have my phone going here. The 8% said 84%, 18% said 75%, 24% said 63.4%, and 50% said 46%.
All right, for those 50%ers, 46%. Yeah, I think I used the reverse statistic when I originally mentioned it, but 54% of our commitments are not held on a job, so 46%, according to that study anyway. And actually, I've been on projects where where those metrics would be a great goal to hit. Let's just say that. So, yeah, it's a big deal, and like I said, we really work to plan our work in a way that we can meet and make commitments. So this is a group doing a milestone pool planning session on design. This happens to be in Moose Jaw, Canada, small little community north of the U.S. border, and they're building a $85 million hospital, if I remember correctly. But they made a huge commitment to an integrated project delivery process. You can see designers and builders standing there planning their work. We do a pool planning session, which is basically a form of reverse scheduling, and people actually write their names on those stickies and make commitments about when they will deliver the product. So it's a fascinating process, and people really, you think people would shy away from it because people are kind of commitment phobic in some ways, but people really embrace this methodology, and it works really well. In this, we used a software to draft the kind of, or to take the information we got off that sticky wall, and then we put it into software that really showed the commitments and due dates and the interrelatedness of one task and how it might affect another. This is my friend Andrew, an architect, explaining how some work that his team was going to do would have affected the deliveries of other components of the design work. So also in Moose Jaw, we did a fair amount of rapid prototyping, and this is kind of something that we have stolen from the manufacturing side of things too. We took big foam walls and we put them up, and then we brought all this equipment into this warehouse. You can see we hung a clock on the wall. We mocked up what pictures would look like. You know, some smart guy put a picture of Homer Simpson up on the wall, but anyway, so we could actually rapidly prototype what a room size would look like, and you could just physically, a couple of people could move these walls in and out and shorten them up. We actually prototyped the bathrooms, the patient bathrooms, which are typically very complex in an acute care facility, believe it or not. But all of this stuff was mocked up in real time with nurses, doctors, patients even were part of this team. And it really produced some great work. Here's another look at that from the overhead. So we took a very lean approach to this and did some 3P rapid prototyping that really helped us design, A, something that would work very well for the client, and B, something that we could actually build. Here's another look at, we gave them what we call this delta wing space because that's the space that really worked on the site. And we actually had the nurses and doctors come in, and you can see that they did their own manual spaghetti diagrams on the left-hand side where they strung a yarn from point to point to dictate, I should say, to show their examples of their workflow and how they would have to move through the building, which helped us figure out what adjacencies should be included in the building, like, you know, where medical equipment storage should be, or how far the closest crash cart should be, or where a nurse's monitoring station should be. So that was all very, very, very helpful. But a very lean concept to actually drive these processes, and that is to bring the problems to the people who actually are going to do the work and have them help us figure out the best way to design the building itself. So we try and take, by involving these teams early, we try and take different options, and we try and measure their desirability and their feasibility and their viability and hit that sweet spot where we can meet all three. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time, but it is really, really time well spent. Here's a project that, this is an actual shot, and it's older now. This project is now topped out, but just to show you what our pre-construction process looked like, we set a target cost for the project early in the project, and everybody, people just, oh, we were so concerned about being able to meet that target because it was so aggressive. And you can see that in the upper left, when we started out, our cost was way above that green line, that green dashed line below that was our target cost. And as is typical, we tried to make sure that we understood the risk as we moved forward. And every time there was a concern in risk, there'd be an uptick in cost because they go hand in hand, correct? So if the mechanical engineer or the mechanical provider is concerned that he may have to buy a more expensive piece of equipment to meet some certain specifications, his risk is higher, and so the cost goes up. But we have made a tremendous amount of process, as you can see in the construction or pre-construction, now currently below target, and we are below target cost actually on both of the large projects that we're currently doing in San Francisco. So what we really want to look at is, you know, are there better ways to do our work? And yes, the obvious answer is yes, there certainly are better ways to do this work. And one of the tenets of the Toyota production system is that it's all about the people. So we really invest heavily in our people processes and our folks and make sure that they get the latest training, that they're up to speed, that they have the chance to collaborate with other people who they're working with, and that has been very, very successful for us. And in fact, we're now taking a bunch of lean concepts and we've rolled them into what we call the Boldt production system, and we've taken that production system now and we're moving it company-wide throughout the country. So it's really worked out great. We have found, by the way, an interesting problem. We have found that people like working on these projects so much that they are reluctant to go back to a traditional design, bid, build project just because the environment is much more painful in that type of environment than it is typically in an integrated project delivery environment. So that's something that we've really had to wrestle with because we still do some design, bid, build work. But what I like to remind the teams is, look, we've all had projects that have gone really well, no matter how they're delivered, whether they're delivered in a lean fashion or an integrated project delivery fashion. We've all had projects that have gone really well, and what we really want to do is drive up the opportunity for success by stacking the deck in everyone's favor, not just in the contractor's favor, but not just in the owner's favor, not just in the designer's favor, but stacking it so that we all can get more out of the project. And if we can continuously do that, then we've really won, and we've provided the client with a huge value, and that makes it more likely that they'll hire us again. So, and really, I think this is close to my last slide here, and then I think Paul wanted to set aside 15 minutes or so for questions. But one of the things you probably noticed is that we put a lot of people on the project early, so the cash flow is different than a typical project. We spend more money sooner, but we save a lot more money later. That's a difficult concept for some owners to grasp because, quite frankly, they think we're being dishonest when we say that, but we're not. And we've got enough data now. The Lean Construction Institute, in fact, is just currently completing a study that shows the success of projects delivered in this fashion. And we'd like to point out that what we really want to do is we want to affect the cost of work. We want to properly plan our work. We want to properly design our work so that it can be built. And if we can lower the cost of work, that's really where the money lies. It's not in fee, it's not in salaried labor or general requirements, in the cost of work itself. So that's really what we try and pursue. That's really about all I've got for my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I think Paul wanted to move to questions now. So Paul?
Sorry, I'm having trouble today here. Okay.
No problem.
So we have several questions. One is there's actually several questions that seem to be kind of related to the leadership side. So one of the questions is, how did the foremans react? I'm assuming that in here there are, different levels of the people's actually doing the work. There are subs, and then there are like foremans. And how did they react to all this change?
So that's a great question, because we use what's called a last planner system, and that means that when we plan our work, we depend on the people who last touched the work to plan it, and those are quite often the foremen. And so when I originally started this, I was really concerned that the foreman would go, oh gosh, somebody went to another seminar and now we have a new thing that we got to do, and that they'd roll their eyes and just shake their heads. But the truth of the matter is, it's exactly the opposite. It's so cool, because foremen now say, thank heaven you're finally asking me for my opinion. All these years I've worked in this industry and nobody listens to me. So we give them a voice, and that voice is valued, and as a result, we get great participation at the foreman level. The problem usually isn't at the foreman level. The problem is usually at the project manager level. And the reason is, I think anyway, is the foremen, obviously, they get this benefit of being able to speak up and be heard, but the project managers are generally financial driven. I'm making some broad generalizations here, but that's where project managers are measured quite often on their financial success of a project. And so they are quite often looking at a project not from the standpoint of optimizing the whole, but from optimizing their piece. So that is sometimes difficult. But yeah, foremen seem to just buy right into it. It's really surprising.
Oh, that's really interesting. So now, subcontractors, how do you get them engaged in this whole thing, right? Subcontractors, I have this vision of what a subcontractor is, and doesn't seem like the person that's going to want to be part of something like this. So I don't know if that's true, but...
Yeah, no, it's true. So I'll just say that it varies. I mean, some of them embrace this rather easily, and some of them resist it. So we really try and work with the teams that... and we call them trade partners. We don't, language means a lot, and they're our partners. They're not our subcontractors, they're our partners. So we're very selective about who we bring on board. Some people, and it really does boil down to people, not just companies, but some people just don't get it. They would rather do what they've always done, and that's okay. There's plenty of room in the marketplace for them to go do that. I think there's less room now than there used to be, and I think there'll be less room in the future. But the truth is, if you're a good design, bid, build contractor, there's plenty of work out there, especially in today's construction economy, which is pretty robust. So that's really it. I mean, we have, and it's interesting. I mean, we'll have companies that we work with, and they assign certain personnel, and the project will go really, really great. And then we'll move to another project, same company we'll be working with, but different personnel, and it doesn't go so well. So it really boils down to individual people. In fact, we are very specific when we invite people to work with us. We need them, obviously, to do our work and do our work well, but we are very specific that we want to interview the actual people who are going to be on the project, similar to how an owner would normally approach something like that. Most owners, when they hire a contractor, want to talk to the superintendent because they know that's who they're going to be living with every day. Well, we're not big on trade partners bringing in their PowerPoints and their marketing folks, you know, in their ties, and yeah, that's not where it's at.
So actually, follow-up question, what about the architects and designers? Do they appreciate that increased feedback?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, and I've worked a lot on the design side, helping in these processes, and I think, well, I'll make a broad comment on the state of the design industry. Unfortunately, the fees have been really squeezed out of design. More so, I think, than certainly in construction. But yeah, designers and engineers, I think, now have to work harder than ever to make a profit. What we're trying to do, and if you talk to most of them, what they say is, you know, we want to just design our stuff. Where we lose money on a project is in contract administration. In other words, once the design has been put out of the building and it's actually being constructed, and they have to monitor that design, that's really where they lose money. They don't. It's just really, really hard to properly estimate what that's going to take. So when we tell them, look, if you're involved in this process up front, and we're going to set you right next to the electrical guy who's actually going to put this stuff in, and he can foresee what problems you might have with your design early on, then the contract administration part should actually be a lot less than it usually is. And in truth, that's usually the way it works. But it's a completely different level of commitment, I think, for everybody, not just the designers. So you have to get them adjusted to that idea. You know, everybody wants to know what's in it for me. How is this going to make my job easier? How is this going to make my life easier? How is this going to make it so that I can not work 8 days a week and 10 hours a day? You know, and I think we now have enough data that we can go back and say, you know, look, join us, and we join hands like this, and we decide to risk a little profit and share a little profit and future savings, then it's a benefit to you. And I think what we found is that once companies get on board with this and experience it, they're more than happy to participate.
That actually kind of goes to the next one, that still kind of talking about buy-in. How did you convince the companies at the higher levels? And I'm assuming, like, you know, maybe the hospital, or I'm not sure who would be the highest level. And I guess the thought process here is probably when we come into a company that's a manufacturing company, the hardest thing to get them to do is realize lean will actually help. It will actually make things go better. How did you guys handle that?
I think early on in our journey, that took more of a sales pitch. You know, and frankly, we went with some trusted clients, or clients that trusted us, and we said, we think we have a better way. Do you trust us? And just give it a go. And they would say yes, and then we'd be successful, and of course that would build on itself. Now that I think we have a reputation for doing this and doing it well, we actually have owners seeking us out, and that, of course, that's, you know, it's a beautiful place to be. Our biggest problem, Paul, really is that we have enough work right now that getting more work is problematic from the standpoint of staffing it. And I'm not saying that we can't staff. We don't go after projects we can't staff, but I'm just saying that really it's a capacity problem for us right now. And I think it's probably typical of most of the construction industry, for that matter, because like I said, the construction economy is fairly robust right now. But yeah, I think owners talk to each other. Certainly they do in healthcare, and I know that they do in other businesses as well. And you know, there's the Construction Users Roundtable. All of those kinds of organizations are networks for owners to talk about what's working and what's not. And I think enough of them have heard now that there's certain benefits to this, that they actually come knocking on our door. Now, every once in a while, we'll run into a situation where it'll be a kind of a typical request for proposal. And we'll say, you know, this is what they're asking for, but what if we came to them and said, we're going to do it with this integrated lean project delivery methodology. So we'll stick our necks out every once in a while and say to a client who's not really looking for this kind of delivery, hey, here's another way to do this. Sometimes that's accepted and sometimes it's not. But like I said, I think early on it was just really a sales pitch. You had to convince somebody to give it a try. And then once we got some experience and the clients got some experience with the success, it just all seems to have continued to roll forward.
Are you getting any, are your efforts being recognized outside of your organization? And if so, by whom?
Well, that's a great question, you know. Yes, I think they are. There's articles in E&R every now and then about some of the projects we've worked on and the successes. We did a project in Akron, Ohio, the Akron Children's Hospital, that the team actually wrote a book about how successful it was, and that has gotten a lot of recognition. So I think, if I'm looking behind the question a little bit, I think we are pretty well known in the construction community and in the healthcare community specifically, because a lot of the integrated projects we've done have been healthcare. But outside of the industry, I don't really know. That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that one.
Kind of the rest of the issues are getting down more kind of at the tool level, but there's one more here. What do you think are the top 3 issues you had at getting started with this whole process way back in the beginning?
Well, you know, change is difficult. I think our industry is very staid. It's very conservative. It's very traditional. You know, companies are handed down, construction companies and trade partners, companies are handed down through generations. So people are very stuck in the status quo. So it's just like any kind of change management. It's very difficult to do just because it's change and people are adverse to change. I think another place that we struggled with was really learning about production tracking, which is something that you guys do in manufacturing. You guys do a lot of, I think, you guys do a lot of production tracking. In other words, you can say at any given point in the line whether you're behind or you're ahead. It's been a little more difficult in construction and is even more difficult in design because there aren't those kinds of very specific milestones, or at least until recently, that you could measure against on a daily basis. So that was difficult. And then probably the third thing was that there was not a lot of software to support this type of approach. That has changed drastically in the last 5 years or so, and the planning piece that I showed you with all the people standing around the stickies and sticking them on the wall, the planning piece was very laborious before we had some of the software that we have now. So that was probably the third thing. I will say that doing planning at that level with the sticky notes is really important, because even if you use software to transfer that information into the digital space, the actual commitment of writing your name on a sticky note and saying you will deliver X by Y is huge. So we have seen, in fact, we've done some just not very scientific experiments, but we've done experiments where we say, okay, we're just gonna do all the planning in the software, and then we'll look at, and then the same team will later do all the planning using sticky notes. Typically speaking, those who do sticky notes and actually go through the physical exercise of filling out a tag and sticking it to a wall, those commitments tend to be more honored than commitments that are made in software. I think it's just one step removed, maybe 2.
Kind of as a meeting note here, we're at the end of our time. We're going to continue. We have about 4 more questions. We're going to continue those questions. If you do need to leave, feel free. You can always come back to the video later and listen to the balance of the questions. Has Boldt utilized any of the traditional lean tools, things like SMED, TPM, 5S, that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're big 5S fans. We're big 5Y fans. We do 3P stuff. We haven't really done Kaizen events, although we now have gotten involved in projects at the level where we're actually helping the client figure out their processes. So that has leaned itself more towards some of those lean tools. Yeah, we're big believers. I mean, I can't say of one that we don't use, but yeah, we're a big believer in the tools.
Was there a specific approach you used in the design process? I mean, in fact, a couple of months ago, we had someone on here talking about lean product design. Is there a specific methodology that you used? And maybe that is the integrated process.
So, yeah, it's the integrated approach, I guess you would say, in terms of methodology. I think just getting all the designers together in the room, in the big room, I really didn't touch on that much, but as those pictures of Moose Jaw showed, we actually all cohabitated in the same space for, at the very beginning of the project, we did that 3 days a week, and then later we moved to 2 days a week, but we actually had CAD stations in that building, or BIM stations, I should say. I just gave away my age and I talk about CAD stations, but yeah, I think that whole process of getting the builders and the designers working side by side on a daily basis is probably the methodology that is most different in terms of design. And we also manage design differently. I mean, we used to have like different levels of drawing development. You know, we'd call them SDs and CDs and DDs and those kinds of things. And we're really removed from that because there's a lot of ambiguity in those different terms. I mean, what's considered an SD, a schematic design, might be different to me than it is to someone else. So I think that's getting away from some of that traditional terminology is different.
What was the most common kind of waste that you identified in your processes?
Probably motion and defects. We do first run studies where, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a first run study is, we basically, let's say we're going to hang a light in a patient room. Some electrician's going to have to come in and actually install that light fixture. We'll do a first run study and we'll video that and share it with the person who's actually doing the work, and then measure our performance. That's a big deal. Now, I think one of the questions that often comes up when I mention that is that, you know, well, gee, how does a union trade partner feel about being videotaped? You know, the truth is that the unions have actually embraced this. Certainly in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a pretty devoutly unionized town, I guess you'd say, but I think they've seen the benefit. You know, one of the things we're trying to do through this is try and keep people safe, right? Like I mentioned earlier, and some of these lean processes really lend themselves to making sure that the projects are safe, so that's kind of a big deal. Yeah, I think that's really about it. It's really once they really have gone through this process and realize we're not out to get them or take advantage of them. In fact, we'd like them to take more advantage of us. It seems to go well.
You talked earlier about safety in construction. What impact has this whole process had on safety?
A huge impact. A huge impact. I probably ought to have that statistic at hand, but I don't. But let me say this. On a project that's 1 million square feet, one that is now completely topped out and enclosed, by way of explanation, I'm just saying there's been a lot of labor hours involved in that project. I believe we've had no lost time incidents on that project to date. So I think that just goes to show you that if you plan safety into your process, it makes a difference. We always talk in construction about safety being an afterthought. I mean, even though we've always put it at the top of every list we make, sometimes safety is an afterthought. And when we actually elevate it to the position of where it has equal standing with other parts of the process, it keeps people safer.
That's just fascinating. Dave, we've come to the end. I just really want to appreciate, or let you know that we really appreciate you coming and doing this. I've done several of these, and I tell you, this has been one of the most fascinating ones for me because I'm in the world of manufacturing all the time, and I don't get a chance to think about how would it apply to somewhere else. Is there any final comment, anything you would like to say here at the end before we leave?
Well, I just say, first off, that the ASQ is a great organization, and I'm really excited to have been able to present, and I really appreciate what the organization does for all of us who are trying to do things a little bit better and higher quality, and it's been an honor. And I will also add, too, that one of the things that we have found important is just really addressing the fact that we need to get people to work together hand in hand. And really, once you're committed to that, lean processes really support that. And Toyota always said, the people at Toyota always said, it's really about the people, and I think that's really what we've found to be true. So I encourage folks to go out and give it a shot.
I am Paul Harbath, the 2016 chair of the American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division webinar series. I want to thank Dave for his presentation and thank you for listening to the Introduction to Lean Design and Construction. If you have any questions about the content of this webinar, feel free to contact Dave directly. Next month, our presenter will be Gerard Leon. High-mix, low-volume companies have had difficulty understanding how lean might apply to them. Join Gerard as he helps us understand how we can design material delivery systems for high-mix, low-volume production. Gerard is one of the founders of the Leonardo Group. This webinar will expand your knowledge of material delivery system options and be a valuable part of your lean repertoire. The American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division webinar series is the place for you to hear the best of the best in the lean industry and learn more about how to apply lean in your application. The American Society of Quality Lean Enterprise Division is a global network of professionals helping individuals and organizations apply proven and leading-edge lean principles and practices to achieve dramatic results for your personal and organizational success. Come lean with us.